Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife, Jean, lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact the family. I'm a past member of the International Progressive MS Alliance Scientific Steering Committee, and currently I serve on the MS Society's Community Review of MS Research Committee. I'm a district activist leader and trustee for the National MS Society, and I chair the Society's California Government Relations Advisory Committee. The MS Society's Ask an MS Expert webcast is designed to give us a place for the MS community to connect and to connect you with experts who are ready to answer your questions on the topics that impact people affected by MS every day. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS navigators are online throughout today's program, answering those questions and connecting you to resources. Exercise and physical activity have been shown to provide measurable benefits for people living with MS. That's why exercise and physical activity are recommended for everyone living with MS at every level of ability. Safe, effective, and enjoyable exercise, movement, and physical activity all start with understanding the unique needs and considerations of living with MS. Today, physical therapist and certified MS specialist, Dr. Gretchen Hawley, is joining us to share ways to adapt physical activity and exercise for every level of ability. Dr. Gretchen is the founder and creator of the Missing Link, an online program that helps people with MS feel more confident in their strength, walking, and their daily activities. Dr. Gretchen's new book, The Missing Link, the essential guide to improve walking, strength, and balance for people with multiple sclerosis, offers tools to take control of your MS symptoms and feel empowered. Dr. Gretchen also shares MS-specific exercises and strategies on her social media platforms that include YouTube, Instagram, and others. Welcome, Dr. Gretchen, and thanks so much for being with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
When I introduced you a moment ago, I said that lifestyle, physical activity, and exercise are the things that deliver real benefits to people with MS. They also contribute to overall wellness. So I'm hoping you'll start us off by sharing some of the benefits people with MS experience when they incorporate lifestyle, physical activity, and exercise into their everyday routine.
Absolutely. And I think this is a perfect starting question because I have a lot of clients with MS who feel like they won't reap the same benefits that someone without MS would reach, even though that's not true. And so, of course, all of the regular benefits of exercise like endorphins and blood flow, circulation, mobility, healthy joints, healthy heart, healthy brain, all of that applies to people with MS just as much as it applies to someone who doesn't have MS. But one thing that is different for people with MS is that it actually can help reduce many symptoms, even symptoms like cognition and fatigue, but especially symptoms like weakness. So exercise can help improve your strength. It can help improve your balance, your flexibility. And when all of those things are combined, it helps with overall movement. So things like walking, climbing stairs, a lot of our day-to-day movements require more than just one form of exercise. So when you're focusing on overall health and wellness and movement, a lot of those benefits will be seen in your day-to-day function.
Can you explain the difference between MS-specific exercises or functional exercise and what I guess we can refer to as regular exercise?
Yes, this is one of my favorite questions, and it's so important, so important to understand the difference because you'll notice different types of improvements with each type of exercise. So I'll start off by saying there's no right or wrong. One isn't better than the other, but the best one for you is going to be based on the goals that you're working towards. So let's start with regular exercise. I also call it traditional exercise. That is going to be a type of exercise that is focused on improving overall strength, overall balance, overall mobility. And so the exercises that you're doing aren't specifically focused for your areas of weakness or any specific movement, but just overall strength. Whereas functional exercise or MS specific exercise is focused on function. And what this means is you pick an activity or a goal like improving your walking, and you break it down into as many movements as possible. And those movements are now your exercises. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to do a demonstration. Is that okay?
That would be great.
Okay. I'm a very visual learner, so I like to demonstrate. So let's go with the goal just for the sake of this example. Let's say the goal is to improve your walking. So general or regular traditional exercises for walking might just be practicing walking as a whole. Or if you are in traditional or regular physical therapy, it might be things like the clamshell exercise or bridging or straight leg raise. But the downfall of those when you're working towards specific goals is that a brain and nerves and spinal cord that has MS and demyelination doesn't have the same carryover. So you might be doing regular exercises and feeling stronger in those specific positions, but your walking's not any better, or your balance isn't any better. You might be saying things like, I've been exercising consistently, but walking is just as hard, or I still am pulling with my arms as I'm climbing up the stairs. So these functions aren't any easier. So that's where functional exercise comes in. So let's say you are looking to improve your walking. My slide here a bit. So walking requires that we move one leg forward and then we move the other leg forward. But it's way more than just one movement. It's actually 7 movements all in one. So I want to demonstrate what that looks like. So if I want to take a step forward, the first thing that I need to do is shift my weight forward. If I don't do that and I go to pick up this leg, I'm going to fall backwards. That's just physics. I've got a lot of weight back here. If I lift it, I'm going to go that way. So step number 1 is shift your body weight forward. Step number 2 is to bend your knee. Then we need to flick our ankle up so we reduce foot drop. Then we bring our knee up, then straighten our knee, then put your heel down. And all while that was happening, I was standing on one leg. And of course, I'm not using a mobility aid right now, but you could be. Regardless of using a mobility aid or not, everyone has to do these 7 steps. If any of those 7 movements are challenging, it's going to affect your walking. So you could take any of those 7 movements and make it an exercise. So this is the first movement. It was weight shifting forward. This can be one of your exercises that you do. It's a very functional exercise. Let's pick another one. Another one was bending your knee. That was step number 2. So you could practice bending your knee, holding on to a mobility aid if you need to, or you could even do it sitting down. So you could practice bending your knee like this. They don't have to be standing. You can do it in other positions, but that's what functional exercise means. Pick a goal that you have and break it down into as many movements that's required and do those movements as your exercise.
So that really breaks down all the mechanics that your body has to go through to complete that overall movement, that be able to walk.
Yes, definitely.
Wow. Well, tell me, how can a physical therapist help someone design a structured exercise program that's going to promote overall well-being and help them maintain independence in accomplishing their daily activities?
Yes. So the first thing that you can do as someone with MS who's going to be going to a physical therapist is to make a list beforehand of all of the goals that you have and a list of all the things that are challenging for you to do, especially those things that are challenging your independence. So things like brushing your hair, getting dressed, showering, feeding yourself, walking, stairs. Make a huge list. The more things on there, the better. And that is where a physical therapist can really come in and fine tune a program for you and your specific goal. And we will ask further questions like, okay, you say your walking is challenging. What about your walking is hard? Is it the balancing? Is it the lifting of your leg? Is it the speed? Is it the endurance? You can't walk as far as you want. Is it all of it? But the more specific that we get, the more specific your exercises can be for you, your symptoms, your MS, and your strengths and weaknesses. So that's where it starts. And then from there, then we piece together a combination of strengthening exercises, stretching exercises, balance, endurance, speed, whatever your goals are and whatever symptoms we're able to find that are causing those challenges can be built into your exercise program. It's very rarely, if ever, just one form of exercise like strengthening.
For some people, the most challenging aspect of exercise is staying with it. What are the benefits of exercising regularly, and what are some common challenges that people with MS face when they're trying to stay consistent with their exercise routine?
Yes, I would say for a lot of the patients and clients that I work with, the number one thing that gets in the way of consistency is fatigue. And then the second thing is a busy schedule. Even if you're not doing a whole lot, just like the combination of lack of energy combined with what you do have to do can leave very little time for actually getting in your exercises. And so there's a few things that I can share with you to help with that. So one is to be aware of research that shows that exercising throughout the day is just as effective as exercising all at once. And so if you are someone where you don't have the energy to do a full 20 minutes or 30 minutes or 40 minutes at once, you don't need to. Or if you're too busy where you don't have 20 minutes all in one sitting to do it, that's okay. What I often suggest is to pick about 3 to 5 exercises and do one before breakfast, one after breakfast, one before lunch, after lunch, and then another at a random time throughout the day. By the end of the day, cumulatively, you'll have done a lot of exercise, just as much as if you had done it all at once. So keep that in mind, because that can really it can help both groups of people who have fatigue so high that you can't do much exercise in one sitting, but also too busy. Because you can really only reap the true full benefits of exercise if you are consistent enough. But I want to say that again, consistent enough. It doesn't mean daily exercise. You do not have to exercise 7 days a week. MS research shows exercising 5 to 6 days a week is best. But I have so many clients who will exercise 3 or 4 days because that's what they can do. And they're still seeing really great improvements in their mobility, strength, walking, balance, you name it. So find what consistency means for you and start there. Don't have a goal of exercising 6 days a week if you're currently not exercising any days per week. Start with just 1 day per week. And over time, slowly add another day and then another day. And make sure you're resting in between those days too.
Aerobic exercise, or cardiorespiratory exercise, helps to build the strength and endurance of your heart and your lungs. What are some examples of aerobic exercise, and how can these kinds of exercises be adapted to all levels of ability?
Yes, aerobic exercise is underrated, and a lot of people that I work with who have MS tend to avoid aerobic exercise at all cost, even though there's so many benefits for it. And the reason for that is because a lot of people in general, MS or not, when we think of aerobic exercise, the majority of us think treadmill, elliptical, Stairmaster, going for a run, and all 4 of those things might be highly unavailable to you right now. And so one thing that we need to do is change what aerobic exercise means. All it means is to increase your heart rate, just to get your heart rate a little bit higher than what it is right now. So my favorite way to increase your heart rate, get aerobic exercise, is to use your arms. Because if you're using your legs, and then you're doing your exercises after it, if you're doing it as a warm-up, or even if you're ending with aerobic exercise, your legs might be so fatigued that you then can't do your strengthening exercises. So again, I'll give you a little demonstration. My favorites are upper body quick movement. So my first is my arm swing. So you're sitting up tall, ideally unsupported, meaning you're not back here. But if you need to be back here, that's okay. But you're here and you're swinging your arms. Your core is engaged. And one way to get any exercise to be a little bit more aerobic is to go faster or add more movement or more power. So really punch up with every single movement. So this is my arm swing aerobic exercise. You can do forward punches, and same idea, go faster. I'm going to get out of breath as I'm talking to you about this, or more motion, really pull and push with every single one, or power, as much as you can put into each punch. You can also do rotational punches. You could do upper body jumping jacks. And if you don't have the shoulder mobility for any of these, just punch down lower. So instead of up here, you're down here. If you can't lift all the way up, just come here, however high you can. As long as it feels a little bit challenging, like you're getting your heart rate up, you're good. Rolling punches is another one of my favorites. My coordination is pretty good today. I'm not hitting myself. Sometimes I'm hitting myself with every rotation. If that's the case, just open your hands. Go, 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 as fast as you can go. So movements like that are a great way to increase your heart rate without fatiguing your legs at all, so that you can still strengthen your legs.
I think this may actually surprise some people, but can you explain how aerobic exercise actually combats fatigue and has a positive effect on mood and MS-related cognitive challenges?
Absolutely. I think this is so important because, again, fatigue is one of the biggest symptoms, most common symptoms that prevents people from exercising. But MS research does show that exercise, and specifically aerobic and balance exercises, can actually reduce your fatigue if it's done correctly. So when you have fatigue, you're never looking to push yourself really hard. It's light exercise. So what the research says is light to moderate movements is what can reduce fatigue. And so for you on that day, if you're feeling more fatigued, it might be this. You might not go faster. This pace might be enough for you to feel like you're getting in an exercise and your heart rate is increasing. So it's all about doing the right level of intensity for you on that day. Not only that, but the more you move your body, I think we need to rephrase and reframe what exercise means, because movement, any movement, is exercise. And if you can really understand that, you'll feel so much more successful, and then you'll stay more consistent with whatever you're doing for movement and for exercise. So the more consistent you are, it improves our mood, our endorphins. Again, everything's always about the endorphins with exercise. It improves our cognition. It improves our ability to multitask. So there's lots of benefits to incorporating aerobic exercise into your routine.
What is neuroplasticity, and how can physical therapy help individuals with MS maximize their neuroplasticity while also addressing some of their other common symptoms? You just mentioned fatigue or spasticity, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Neuroplasticity is the ability of our brain to do one of two things. The first thing is to strengthen our neural pathways. So the pathway from our brain all the way down to any muscle in our body. So neuroplasticity can strengthen that neural pathway. But sometimes in MS, there's so much demyelination that pathway just isn't working anymore. There's no hope for it, essentially. But that's okay, because neuroplasticity also can rewire itself. It can find a brand new neural pathway. So whether you're someone who has okay strength or very little strength, you can strengthen those neural pathways. Or if you have no strength, if you try to lift your leg and it just doesn't lift at all, your brain has the capacity to find a new way to lift your leg. I find this information so inspiring and so hopeful, because it's the reason that people with a progressive disease like MS actually can improve your strength, your balance, and your walking, because your brain is able to do this, strengthen and rewire itself. So the way that you want to work this into neuroplasticity exercises is to do specific exercises for the weakest parts of your body. And this can be extremely defeating and discouraging because you're going to try to move that body part and it might not move at all, but you still have to do it as an exercise. The only way to find a new pathway or strengthen the one that's already there is to do the thing that's hard. And so if it's hard to lift your leg, practice lifting your leg, even if it's not lifting. If it's hard to lift your ankle because you have drop foot, practice lifting your ankle. And so you can incorporate those types of repetition for those specific muscle groups into your exercise routine. And you're even more likely to find and strengthen those neural pathways.
Some people with MS may have difficulty with balance and coordination, and this directly impacts their mobility and their stability. What are some exercises that can help improve balance and coordination for people with MS? And I'm hoping you can mention a few different exercises based on different levels of ability.
Yes. So I'm all about the demonstrations. And so the thing that is most important when we're talking about balance is what positions you lose your balance in. So if, again, let's first go with the example of walking, but then we'll go with a seated example. If you're someone who's looking to improve your walking, it's really important to know what positions of balance you need in order to take a single step forward. So let's do a demonstration. So in order to take that single step forward, as I demonstrated earlier with the strengthening exercises that we need, you are standing on one leg. So you have to be able to stand on one leg, even if you're using a mobility aid. So therefore, a balance exercise of standing on one leg would be immensely important because you need to stand for at least a solid 3 seconds to have enough time to move your other leg forward. So you'd want to practice that on both sides. This can be challenging because in order to stand on one leg, you need to get the other leg off the ground. And for a lot of people, bending your knee might be too challenging to do that. So you can always just bring your leg out to the side or forward, or if you have a step in your home, just stand on the lowest step so this leg's just hanging off. So that would be one. But another balanced position is staggered stance. Before you take a step forward, this is the position that we're in. And then we need to shift our weight and then move our leg forward. So having this balance here is immensely beneficial. So practicing just standing here, your knees are slightly bent and just hold. You can hold on to a mobility aid, trekking poles, walking stick, whatever you want. How long can you stand here without really losing your balance? If it's too challenging, widen your step. Still staggered, but just wider. I am not a fan, this is just my personal preference, but I'm not a fan of any exercise where it's a tandem stand. So one foot directly in front of the other, or tandem walking, because with everything that you do with MS, you're training your brain to repeat the movements that you do. So if you're repeating this movement, you're essentially training your brain to walk like this, which we do not want because you're even more likely to trip over yourself. So I much more prefer these staggered stance balancing exercises. And then you can add the weight shifting that we demonstrated a bit ago. So that's how you would improve balance. However, you mentioned stretching as well. Stretching is going to be really important for the specific muscles that you have tightness in. So often I'll hear someone tell me, I stretch all the time, but my leg is just still so tight. And I'll ask them, well, what stretches are you doing? And they'll list like 10 of them, but none of them are for their hamstrings. And that's where their tightness was. And so the thing to know about stretching is you got to know what muscle it is. A physical therapist can help you, or you might know just from where your tightness feels like it's prioritizing. And then you would stretch that out and then hold it for anywhere from 20 to 30 seconds, or if it's true spasticity, a little bit longer.
I've heard you mention mobility aids a couple of times. Can you talk a little bit about mobility aids that might be able to assist with exercise?
Yes, I love using mobility aids for every client that I work with, because the thing about using mobility aids for exercises is that it can take balance out of the equation. So for example, with those walking movements, when you are practicing those, it requires a lot of balance. And if you don't have balance, then you're not going to be able to do those strengthening exercises very well. So you can use a mobility aid to help you get the most out of your strengthening exercises, and it can help you have better form. And one thing about neuroplasticity is that the better form you have, the better the neuroplasticity is going to be. Again, neuroplasticity strengthens the neural pathways for whatever form you are repeating. So good form is extremely important. Also, one thing I forgot to mention with the previous question, the seated balance exercises. So those were two demonstrations for walking or standing based movements. But for seated based movements, one of my favorite exercises, you might find this silly, but one of my favorite seated balance exercises is to sit up tall in the middle of your chair. So you're not reclined, you're just sitting up tall here with your best posture, trying not to round or slouch at all. And how long can you stay here for? For a lot of us, this can be really challenging, and it strengthens your core. The stronger your core is, the better your balance will be. But if that's easy, you can take it to the next step, which is reaching. So I'm in the middle of my chair, but I'm going to reach over here and then come back to the center. I might reach forward and then back to the center. I might reach down. You can reach anywhere you want to reach, but you're just making yourself move and then come back to the center. That is a great form of seated balance where you're training your core and your whole body to have the strength that it needs so that mobility, even just standing up, can be easier.
I think you actually started to answer my next question a moment ago, but I wanted to talk for a minute about spasticity. Perhaps you could explain what spasticity actually is and tell us, are there any specific exercises or stretching techniques that will improve someone's range of motion as well as alleviate spasticity and perhaps improve their mobility?
Yes, spasticity, I find, and most of my clients find, is one of the most difficult symptoms because there's sometimes where there's nothing you can do. It's just there and it's not going away until you rest it out. So spasticity is a form of muscle tightness, and there's a big range. It can range from grade 0, meaning no spasticity, to grade 4, meaning not even the Hulk could move your limb. It is not going to move. And so that's a pretty big range for 0 to 4. But overall, the way that I like to think about spasticity is muscle tightness that prevents or limits movement. So if you're walking and you feel like you can't bend your leg because it's so tight, it's not the same as weakness. Weakness, it would feel like it's difficult to lift your leg because you don't have the strength, whereas spasticity feels like something's stopping you from lifting your leg or moving your leg or your arm, whatever it might be. So that's what I like to think of as the definition that's easy to understand for spasticity. When it comes to stretching, there's research showing that for spasticity, there's 2 different types of stretching that you can try. One, as I mentioned a bit ago, is about the 20 to 30 second hold, and you would do that for about 2 to 4 times each side of your body. Another form of research shows that actually holding longer, so just 1 repetition, but holding for 3 to 7 minutes can be much more relaxing and relieve the spasticity. With either one, you want to do it at least 3 times a day. It's really important that you continue the stretching. Otherwise, you'll feel nice and relaxed after your stretching session. But if you wait 24 hours to then do it again, you're starting back at square one. And so the idea with stretching is that you stretch, and then there's a few hours where you miss, and so it gets tighter, but then you're stretching again. And because you're stretching consistently, it never gets back to the really, really tight, painful areas. Sometimes the triggers can make it worse, like heat intolerance or stress or exercise. And so eliminating triggers can also be helpful. I'll do a quick demo if that's okay for stretching. Never exercise on a wheelchair. It's just what I've got here. So for the most common areas of weakness, or not weakness, tightness and spasticity are the hamstrings and the calf muscles or the hip flexors. So for your hamstrings, you'd want to straighten one leg. Doesn't matter what your ankle is doing. but straighten your leg, sit up tall, and hinge forward. And you would feel the stretch anywhere from behind your bottom to behind your knee. So anywhere in this area. And again, you can hold for 20 to 30 seconds and then do the other side. You can hold for 3 to 7 minutes if you're comfortable and relaxed in this position. So this is one of my favorite ones. Another one, if you wanted to do a standing version of the hip flexor stretch, that would be something like this. So this staggered stance, tuck your hips under, and you should feel this in the front of your hip. A way that you can do this seated, this is sometimes tricky, but separate your feet and pivot down. So you'd feel this in your hip flexor as well. So those are some of the two most common muscles that when tight limit your mobility and your walking. So those are the ones that I usually give to most of my clients.
Well, you shared some great information with us, and I think the demonstrations really helped illustrate the kinds of things we were talking about. So thank you for those. Let me ask you, if we had to pick one big takeaway that you'd like our viewers to remember, what would it be?
That is a great question. If I had to pick one takeaway, I would say to fully understand neuroplasticity, because exercising with MS, as we've talked about, can be so challenging, so defeating. And if you don't understand neuroplasticity and the possibilities that it offers, even though it might take a while, it might take a few months to a few years, but understanding it is what can keep you hopeful. It can keep you empowered, even on those days where you're feeling defeated. And it's okay to take rest days too, but again, just constantly reminding yourself of the possibility with neuroplasticity when it's combined with functional exercise.
Well, I want to thank you again for being with us today, Dr. Gretchen.
Thank you for having me.
For information and resources on MS, be sure to visit the MS Society's website and the YouTube channel. You'll find exercise and physical activity recommendations for people with MS at every level of ability, as well as guidelines and videos on aerobic, stretching, and breathing exercises for everyone living with MS. The National MS Society's Pathways to Wellness in MS exercise program is also a great resource for finding the latest wellness research and learning about evidence-based exercise and lifestyle physical activity recommendations that can positively impact your health and improve your quality of life. I also want to remind you that the National MS Society's MS Navigator team is your best partner when it comes to connecting you to the very best information and resources on living with MS. You can reach an MS Navigator by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. And when you do visit the Society's website, be sure to check out the research updates and news, information on connection programs like self-help groups and MS Friends. You'll hear about ways for you to get involved, and you'll find out about upcoming events that are taking place near you. Remember, you can connect with the National MS Society and others affected by MS on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And I hope you'll join me every week on the Real Talk MS podcast, where I continue the conversation that we start here. You'll find Real Talk MS at realtalkms.com, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. I'd like to thank Dr. Gretchen for joining us today. Please remember that a recording of this webcast will be available at the Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSExpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. I hope you'll join us at this same time for next week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. You can always find our upcoming program topics on the National MS Society's website. And now I have a favor to ask each of you. Getting your feedback on today's webcast is important. So if you're watching on Facebook Live, you'll see a link to a survey pinned to the comments section. And on YouTube, you'll find that link in the program description. Completing the survey makes a real difference. The information you provide helps us continuously improve, and it helps shape future programs. The survey takes just 1 minute, so I hope you'll take a minute to fill it out. On behalf of Dr. Gretchen Hawley and the National MS Society, I want to thank you once again for joining us. Please stay safe and make healthy choices.